Welcome back to Addiction, Depression, Recovery. You've all heard it before, so say it with me. The first step is to admit that you have a problem. Sounds pretty simple, right? Unfortunately not. It took an incredibly long time for me to realize what I was doing to myself. Today, we're going to talk about why it's so hard to admit or even realize you have an addiction, and hopefully I can help you avoid wasting as much time as I did ignoring the obvious. To begin with, let's just go through some common signs of addiction. Here we will say use as a substitute for whatever activity you're concerned about. Gambling, drinking, drug use, you name it. There will be differences based on your specific addiction, but there are some common threads that run through all addiction. So here are a number of them to consider. So it is possible you have a problem if you think about your use a lot. You tried to quit using or cut back, but couldn't. You don't feel normal if you don't use. You use in order to escape problems, responsibilities, or difficult emotions. You've engaged in risky behaviors and gotten into danger or trouble because of your use. Your use has caused negative effects on your life, school, work, or relationships. You experience cravings to use. You experience physical withdrawals when you don't use or are dependent upon your use. Your use affects your mood or emotions. You've lost control over your use. You've hurt or lied to important people in your life because of your use. You abandoned hobbies or interests because of your use. You experienced depression or anxiety before or after use, or you experienced guilt or regret after use. You've avoided loved ones in order to use. Loved ones have expressed concern about your use. You make excuses or compromises in order to use. You fail to take care of yourself in order to use, skipping meals and neglecting hygiene. You sometimes binge your use, or you have a family history of addiction. That's a lot of information to take in, I know, so let's make things a lot simpler. If you've been thinking about your use lately, comparing your use to that of others, maybe Googling the activity you're concerned about, then you most likely have a problem. So stop asking yourself if you have a problem. Try these questions out instead. Is your use keeping you from living your best life? If you keep going on like this for 5 years, where will your life be then? And are you happy with that picture? Seeing the problem is easier than you'd think if you just ask the right questions. There are some existing tests that you can use to get a clear picture of your situation. As an example, let's take a look at some questions about AUD, or alcohol use disorder. Now, to clarify, alcoholism is a non-medical term used commonly to describe someone with an alcohol problem, whereas alcohol use disorder is an actual diagnosis by a medical professional for someone with varying degrees of dependency on alcohol. Alcohol use disorder, AUD, can be measured as mild, moderate, or severe, and there is a list of 11 questions you must give honest answers for to determine where you sit on the scale. Mild AUD means you display 2 to 3 symptoms. Moderate AUD means you display 4 to 5 symptoms. And severe AUD means that you display 6 or more symptoms. So let's take a look at the actual questions now. In this test, you answer questions based on the last year of your life. So, is it true that in the last year? Question 1. There have been several times when you drank more than you intended or for longer than you intended. Question 2. You spent a lot of time drinking and or feeling sick the next day because of drinking. Question 3. You tried to stop drinking more than once, but you were unable to do so. Question 4. You experienced cravings for alcohol. Question 5. Drinking or being sick from drinking interfered with work, school, or social engagements. Question 6. You continued to drink despite consequences at work, at school, with family, etc. Question 7. You cut back on hobbies or activities that were important to you so you could drink instead. Question 8. You continued to drink despite changes to mood, especially depression or anxiety, or drinking too much began to affect your physical health. You suffered more than one blackout. Question 9. You drank even though being drunk increased your chances of getting hurt, such as drinking before driving. Question 10. You continue to drink even though you feel like you need to drink more to achieve the original effects. And question 11. You experienced withdrawal, including physical symptoms, when you did not drink. You might notice that this test has a few questions that any average 20-something-year-old would be likely to say yes to. Like question 10 about your tolerance for alcohol increasing. Most people who drink frequently have an increased tolerance, so looking at just that question might make you feel dismissive about this test. Or question 4 about having a craving for alcohol. I mean, who doesn't occasionally crave a drink at about 4 o'clock on a Friday when they're primed for their weekend fun? Haven't they earned that after a long, hard week of work? Just remember, this test is designed to work when you answer all the questions together and look at the bigger picture. Anyone who drinks might get a point or 2 doing this test, which is why only showing 2 or 3 symptoms only reveals a possibility of mild AUD. Looking over the questions, you can see they vary greatly in severity, going all the way up to experiencing physical withdrawals if you don't drink. Dissecting this test in this way reminds me of something. It reminds me of me. Looking back, it's so insanely clear to me now that I struggled with alcohol abuse, but I truly did not see it for years. And I've been thinking a lot about why that is, about why addiction is so often referred to as an elephant in the room. How can people like me look right at something that's right in front of their face and just not see it? Well, it's because it doesn't just jump out in front of you and say, "Hello!" It shows up slowly. First, there's just a little of the elephant's trunk in the room, then a bit of its head. Soon both ears are in, then the front legs. You move over and make room for it a little at a time. You have long enough with each new elephant part to get used to it, to get comfortable around it. It's not just an elephant that crashes through the wall of your living room and crushes you. It's a sneaky, tiny, adorable cartoon elephant that grows a little bit each day. I think that coming to the realization that you have a problem happens much the same way. At least it did for me. First, you'll notice the little things on the list. Did you spend a lot of time drunk? Did you experience cravings? Did your tolerance for alcohol increase? But those minor issues aren't enough to point out a problem. Hey, plenty of people experience these things. No big deal. Next, you'll have to justify some of the more serious signs you've got a problem. Several times you drank more than you intended or for longer than you intended? Well, hey, it was a party. People were still awake partying with me. You continued to drink despite problems with family, school, or work. Well, of course, I was stressed out by all the problems, so I had a drink to calm down. There's always a reason for every drink, because you're looking for one. Soon, you reach a point where the signs are hard to ignore, and once you notice them, it's much tougher to justify them. You tried to stop drinking more than once, but were unable to. I don't need to quit. You experienced withdrawals when you did not drink. Shut up. It's now a lot tougher to drown out the little voice in your head. That voice is getting bigger and it's angry. So you drink to drown that voice out. You drink the voice away. You use the fact that you have physical withdrawals without alcohol to justify your continued drinking, because if you stop drinking, you'll just shake and be sick, so why would you do that? Now, the elephant is all the way in the room. But it's not that you can't see it, it's that you've conditioned yourself through years of abuse to ignore it, to block it out of your mind, just like that voice of reason in your head. You're now deciding not to see it, when before you just couldn't. Addiction usually happens over a long period of time. And this test mirrors that escalating quality. Not directly, the questions don't go in order from least to most severe or anything like that, but they cover the spectrum neatly, and by mirroring an addict's experience in the escalation of their addiction, but moving the order of the symptoms around seemingly at random, they can make you hold a mirror up to your own behavior, surprising you with both memories of symptoms you looked past previously and the things you're currently choosing to ignore. Tests like this exist for many different addictions, and here's something that I'll probably bring up in nearly every episode I make, so get used to it. Get up and do some research. Nothing was more helpful in my recovery than learning about my addiction and what I could do about it. You can go to www.ncadd.org and take several self-tests to help you determine if you have a problem. There's one for drugs, one for alcohol, and one for teens specifically. Or you can Google your own addiction, like how to decide if I'm addicted to gambling, or do I have a problem with alcohol? Remember, all the resources are out there waiting for you. Go use them. The most important part of realizing you have a problem is honesty. And again, that sounds simple. It isn't. Remember that if you have an addiction, you've already been lying to yourself and others for years, hiding your problem and justifying it in your mind. Breaking through that shield is hard. You spent a lot of time building that shield. It's a strong shield. For me, the shield was built of pride. I was the party man. I could stay up all night and party with the best of them. Always the last one up at the end of the party, and still the first one up in the morning to kick off the next party. I had built a self-image centered around my lifestyle, and I had no interest in changing either of those things. I told myself I was just a social drinker, even after I started drinking alone every night after work. I wasn't an alcoholic. I was a party animal. Every word in my mind was chosen carefully to frame my behavior in a positive light, so I could view my life in a context that I was comfortable with. Whether you're watching this video to learn about your own addiction or to try to help someone important in your life, you need to understand something about realizing you have a problem. It is absolutely earth-shattering. In my first video, I told a brief version of my story. I told you that I was lying in bed, sicker than I'd ever been after a night of drinking, curled up and wondering if I would die, just like this one day. Curled up in a ball, shaking, with a taste of blood and bile in my mouth and what felt like gravel in my throat, my face red and white and a little blackish blue under both eyes. This would be how I would go. Not this day, but someday. Someday alone in a dirty back alley or in a gutter, or maybe if I was lucky in the back room of a homeless shelter. I saw this all clearly in my mind, and my shaking got worse because I was sobbing now. I had never felt so low and so helpless and hopeless in my life. And you know what? That was not the moment I realized I was an alcoholic. That was the moment I realized I could change my life for the better, that I could pick myself up and stop drinking. I could do something about this. I could do it for her. I could do it for me. I could do it for my family. But it was not the moment that I admitted to myself that I truly had a problem. I know that sounds strange, but let me explain. The next night, after I had healed up just a little physically and slept long enough to get out of bed again, I sat down at my computer and started the long research process that is still ongoing. I couldn't really sleep or eat quite properly for a few days, so although I went back to work as normal, I didn't have that much energy at home. I used research to distract myself from the discomforts of withdrawals and of having to face the things I'd been ignoring for too long. And it wasn't until I'd gone through a few nights of research that I discovered a new thought in my mind. You see, I had vaguely accepted that I had a problem, but not that I had a problem. Does that make any sense? I guess what I mean is that my pride still didn't let me say, hey, you are an alcoholic. because that word didn't apply to me. An alcoholic is someone who wears several layers of dirty clothes and pushes a shopping cart around. An alcoholic is an old man in a white tank top on his lawn in his underwear in the morning, passed out by the open door of his car. An alcoholic is someone without hope, and that just isn't me. I can't be an alcoholic. But the truth is that alcoholics just don't look like that. Addicts don't look like that. Not every drug addict looks like an after picture in a before and after lineup. Not every gambling addict is broke begging for change for food. You have to remember, even gambling addicts have good days at the casino too. And drug addicts can be successful businessmen and women. I mean, who else could afford such an expensive habit? And alcoholics can function. They can get by well enough that people think they're fine. They're fun. They're the life of the party. It's not until the party is over that an alcoholic looks the way they do in our heads. And that's not something most people see. And so, my definition of alcoholism and addiction slowly began to change. And then, finally, it hit me. I had a moment at about 3 in the morning, and after 4 or 5 hours of research and self-tests that all pointed to the same thing, when something shifted in my mind and clicked into place. I finally associated that taboo word, alcoholic, with me. My mind resisted the thought. My first reaction was to push it away violently, and I had a compulsive need for a drink. I could practically taste whiskey in my mouth for a moment. But once it happens, you can't just pretend you haven't made the association. It's there. The elephant is in view. It's too late. You can't ignore it anymore. It's time to look right at it and see it. All of it. Slowly, carefully, I poked at the thought again. It hurt to poke at it. I hadn't even gotten all the way through it yet and it hurt, but I kept thinking. My preconceptions about what an alcoholic is fell slowly away. The image of myself I'd built up as a shield around this thought was finally knocked aside. I forced myself to go back through what I'd learned about alcoholism, alcohol use disorder, addiction, and the symptoms and signs of all of these things, and I had to finally accept that I couldn't say it. I still couldn't say it. I had thought it all the way through, clearly, slowly, methodically. I had accepted everything. I knew what I was, what I had done to my life, to my body. I knew I had a problem, and a big one. And I had accepted that I had to quit drinking. I had to do something about this, and I had to do it now. But I couldn't actually say the words, even though I knew it was true already. It was as if these words were some kind of incantation, and if I didn't say it out loud, it wouldn't be true. That's a stupid thought, I told myself, because I am an adult and there is no magic spell here. I just need to admit to myself that I still couldn't say it. I got up, got a drink of water, walked manically from my kitchen to my living room and back a few times, cleared my throat once or twice. I stopped at one point, made a pose like a Shakespearean actor. I kept laughing at myself for being stupid, and I kept mumbling, "Just say it." And finally, I sat down on my couch and took several deep, long breaths. And then, all alone in my living room, about an hour after I first accepted the full width and breadth of my situation, I said to myself just once, and very quietly, I am an alcoholic. And the end of the last word was swept away as I began to cry, or sob, or wail. I don't really remember how long I cried for, but it was one of those times that you clean out everything inside you all at once and pour it out of your eyes right down to your soul. And when it was over, I said it again. I am an alcoholic. It still hurt. Actually, it still hurts now, but it's true. And after saying it a few more times, I was laughing. Not because anything was funny or out of joy, but pure relief. I had faced down my demons, and while I hadn't beaten them, I had named them. So, take some time to consider what is keeping you from living your best life. Think if there's something in your life that has taken over, something unhealthy, something excessive. Take stock of your life and decide if the wrong things are dominating. consider whether something has been escalating quietly while you chose to look the other way. I'm not suggesting that everyone on the planet has something they are addicted to or struggle with, but I do know that there must be a lot of people out there like me. People who just won't look at their elephant. That's who this video is for, and I hope I've been able to help some of those people with the information I've shared. Before I go, I want to tell you about the next video I'll be making because I've already started researching it. While today's video centered on the person with an addiction and how you can decide if you have a problem, the next video is going to focus on the loved ones of those with an addiction. If someone you care about struggles with addiction, you want to help them, it can be difficult and maybe even seem impossible. You've already been dealing with the stress and worry that living with an addict can cause, and when you add in the stress of trying to help them and the hopelessness of not knowing how you can do that without them pushing you away, it can be overwhelming. So I'll be covering effective ways to talk to an addict and doing everything I can to give meaningful advice to you brave people who stand behind those you love and try to help them forward. Because you deserve it. Thank you for watching. I hope this helped. I know it helped me. This has been Addiction, Depression, Recovery. And remember, we do heal.